we'll call the meeting to order. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll start with roll call from Susie.
Okay, Committee Member Hopkins.
I'm here.
Committee Member Goodman is not here. Chair Somin.
Yes, thank you.
Chair Lee.
I'm here.
Committee Member Pierce is not here. And Committee Member Switjink is also not here. Committee Member Carter. And Committee Member Thompson is also absent. And Committee Member Rich is also not here. And then Committee Member Maurer.
I'm here.
Oh, and here it is. Yes. Committee Member Switjink. Okay, and we have 6 members here. We don't have a quorum, but we don't have any action items today.
Correct. Thank you. All right. So I don't have a review of action items from last week. We're going to reorder some of the agenda today. We'll take our comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda, and then we will move the city manager and the interim community development director, who will be presenting with him, I believe, before the planning department report and the city council report. But first, we will take comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda. So if you are on Zoom and you'd like to speak, please raise your virtual hand so that our staff can unmute you. And go ahead, Steve.
Hi, Steve Pierce. Jerry, our former member of the committee, brought up a point in a meeting we had last week with the metrics group, and I thought it was a very good question. We were talking about transportation and a little bit about active transportation and how much it may or may not assist us in lowering our vehicle miles traveled. And he posed the question, well, what are people driving to Santa Rosa for? And I thought more about that later. I thought, that's actually a really good question that no one has really surveyed people here in Sebastopol. We try to shop here locally, but the truth is we all drive over to Santa Rosa for various retail activities. And to me, it seems like a prime example of the committee can assist the chamber, who I talked with Ambrosia Thompson, who sits on the committee and just happens to be the president of the chamber. I haven't spoken with Mariah Volk yet, the director, but I expect she'll be interested too. Ambrosia was definitely interested in doing a survey. It may be something as simple as, what are the top 3 or 5 things you frequently drive to Santa Rosa, Cotati, Rohnert Park, and go for retail shopping? What are your most frequent? And what does that tell us? We get that information. It tells us, well, we can potentially approach those business owners and see if they're interested in opening in Sebastopol. I know, hey, we have this ordinance in town that you can't have chain stores, but that really only applies to the downtown core. The Redwood Marketplace, we've all known, sat empty for 10 years there. And it's a prime candidate as well, some other retail space.
Hi, thank you, Steve.
So I'm wanting to see if the Climate Committee is interested in pursuing, similar to what we did with the electrification survey, but in this time in conjunction with the Chamber of Commerce. And maybe the city has got some interest in this too. So it's an opportunity for the committee to assist increasing our retail sales and decreasing our traffic, our vehicle miles traveled over to Santa Rosa and elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I forgot to mention that we are trying to limit public comment to about 3 minutes today. And we don't usually put time limits on, but we have an important presentation from city manager and we have multiple people, I believe, are speaking. So Usually the city council follow the city council's practice of alternating between Zoom and the room. Is there anyone on Zoom who would like to speak to any item that's not on the agenda? I'm looking at you, Rob. All right. So I believe we have another member of the public in the room to speak to a community event.
Hello, committee. My name is Robert Vandewally, and I'm a member of a group of people who do a thing called kinetic sculpture racing. And it's up in Humboldt, and it's a giant 3-day festival. And it fits in with active transport really well because all the vehicles are human powered. So what I would like to do this year in October is to do a mini 1-day event, bring some of these kinetic sculptures to Sebastopol, have the artists pedal them around, and have a festival here at this end of Morris Street, and advocate for active transportation and the solutions that are here in our community that are already reducing our carbon footprint, like the refill store and the other stuff that's happening. Bring it out, let the people interact with it, and showcase what we're already doing. And it's a great chance to start running some surveys, and I invite the committee to think about even having a table at the event. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, last call for anyone on the Zoom to let their wish to speak be known on items not on the agenda. And please raise your virtual hand if you're interested in speaking. I'll give a few seconds. And we will close comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda. Moving on is, I don't think we have to do statements of conflict of interest because we have no action items, correct? So we'll move forward to the city manager's report on the recommendations that staff are making to council or are interested in making to council regarding the future of the Climate Action Committee.
So good afternoon, and thank you for having me. I haven't met most of you in person. My name is Don Schwartz. I was called still new city manager, so I'll take that, I guess, for Sebastopol, and very pleased to have that role and pleased to be here this afternoon. We do have a presentation for you and some topics we want to talk about, but I want to start with an apology. I know you've had conversations or discussions about the city's fiscal situation and the potential of changes for this committee. But one of my values, I have 3 strong values: integrity, fiscal responsibility, and collaboration. And from what I understand, the collaboration piece of that was missing. And as a city manager, that ultimately falls to me. And I apologize that conversations have not been done in that spirit. And hopefully starting today and going forward, they will reflect a more collaborative approach regardless of what the outcome is or where we go. So I just want to start off and acknowledge that out the gate. Speaking of fiscal responsibility being a second value, I understand that you do appreciate and recognize we are in a fiscal emergency and have a true crisis before us. The sales tax that is proposed for the November ballot is a foundational piece to solving that fiscal emergency. It alone will not fully solve the fiscal emergency, although it's a really important, single most important piece of solving that puzzle. But it doesn't make the fiscal challenges go away. It certainly helps ameliorate them. The staff for this group, the community development / planning team, it's been a struggle. We're with Jane Riley, who I hope you've met before, or perhaps not. Well, Jane, I'm sorry, you haven't met. So Jane Riley, our interim community development director, and she'll be speaking to you shortly. So Jane is essentially the third person in that seat or in that function this year. So that's a lot of turnover, and there'll be more. She's in a room, and we're hoping to hire the position on a full-time basis relatively soon if we're successful. That is the most overstretched group in the city, in my opinion, with what's already on their plate. And I learned today the details, some details about 500 hours of work we're supposed to complete for our housing element by the end of this year, remaining work. So that's 12 weeks plus of somebody full-time doing nothing else, which basically is, close to the end of the year. I'm not saying we're going to get it all done, but that was sort of striking to me, along with a variety of other commitments, which I can explain those to you if you're interested. But I don't want to bore you if you're not. But there's plenty plus for this group to do. And as Jane and I talked about it this morning, part of that is a factor of the turnover in the director level. Part of it is ambitious by nature staff and council and a lot of needs and things we want to do for Sebastopol. So the challenge is particularly acute, but it will be ongoing. Just by way of background, Kenneth said I should mention this, so I will. Just a little bit of personal background and about my sort of environmental interests and family interests. So my first internship out of college was working for the Audubon Society back in Washington, D.C., doing lobbying on Capitol Hill. And then after that, my first professional job was working with the Environmental Protection Agency for 2.5 years in San Francisco on a toxic pollution problem. And right now, I actually earlier today got a chance to say goodbye to my daughter as she returns to the San Diego area, where she is a conservation specialist and working in the sustainability field for the city of Chula Vista. It's her first professional job out of college. So the environmental ethic runs deep. I'm not sure if it's in the genes or not. I'm not sure how all that works, but I do know that as a value, it's something that I hold personally important. My family does as well. And I do recognize we have an existential crisis before us, and the work that you do and that all the climate activists and staff, et cetera, are doing really important work for the community and the world. And so I want to call attention to that and acknowledge that. So that's the introduction, and Jane will take it from here for a while. We're really here, I think, more to listen than to talk, trying to be collaborative, but to the extent you have questions or I can help, feel free.
Thanks, Don. As Don mentioned, Jane Riley, interim planning director, community development director, what have you. Many years ago, I was John Jay. I know we don't look a lot alike, but I served as associate planner here for 8.5 years. Again, it was many years ago. I left in 2003. So had been with the County of Sonoma for many years after that, leading their comprehensive planning division. And I then retired. See what a good job I did of retiring. Here I am. I kind of failed at retiring. I'm a director of advanced planning and housing for a firm called Four Leaf, and we wrote the city's housing element. So some of you will recognize me from that. In the meantime, here I am filling in until we get an awesome new community development director in here. I'm really excited about that process, and I'm really excited about getting everything really back on track, because it's been kind of a mishmash, piecemeal, not, when you have such turnover in the seat that I'm in now, you can't work efficiently and effectively. And so it's been difficult. And I was telling Don, the bad part's over. You're going to get somebody great in there, and you're really going to be able to work more efficiently moving forward. In the meantime, we've got this crisis. We got to figure out what we're going to do through the end of the year. So that's why we are here today. Next slide, please, Izzy. So I want to start with a land acknowledgement, and this is the acknowledgement that is on the front of your framework. We acknowledge that the City of Sebastopol rests on the ancestral territory of the Southern Pomo and Coast Miwok peoples. We recognize with gratitude this land and its traditional stewards. I also have on this slide a climate acknowledgement that comes from the climate emergency resolution. And I also have an acknowledgement and appreciation for the volunteer work of this committee. We want you to know that we do recognize the vital importance of your work, and we want to be able to ensure that you can continue your work despite this crisis that the city is in. Next slide, please, Izzy. So this is what we're here to talk about today. How can we ensure that your work can continue despite the city's fiscal crisis? And we don't know that this is an ongoing crisis. We don't know that we're not going to run into a pot of money, some new funding source, whatever, to really be able to throw more at it, if you will, in future years. What we're talking about is for the fiscal year that we're entering now. So we want to talk about how your projects and procedures impact staff. We want to talk about your status as a Brown Act body, because that definitely has implications on how much work is generated and obviously the things that you can and can't do. We want to talk about some ideas we have for possible changes that could reduce staff costs, but mostly we want to hear your ideas. So I've got a bunch of ideas that kind of run the gamut. We are not wedded to any of these ideas, and we purposely made them kind of out there and reaction focused, so that we can hear what you absolutely hate, what won't work at all, and what you think we might be able to massage and move forward as we come up with options for the city council to consider. Next slide, please. Oh, before we get into those options, I've included some costs in here. So I want to be clear about these cost calculations. They reflect only the past year's hours that were spent on CAC work by City of Sebastopol planning staff. So those associated tasks, and they're calculated at this year's approved billing rates. We know the actual savings would be less because not all recovered staff hours would be spent on revenue generating hours. And so we're using an estimate of 50%. We're not going to try and tell you their staff are going to be so productive if they don't have to do CAC work that they're going to do all these other things. We say we'll be 50% productive. I also want to note that we're using the approved fiscal year rates for the planning technician, the associate, and the director, and that future years could generate more or less staff hours depending on the nature of your work. And by that, I mean writing an ordinance. I've got a right to nature ordinance in the binder here that we've been going through. That kind of work is going to generate more staff hours than, for instance, the compost giveaway, which takes no staff hours. So the kind of work that you're doing in future years is going to directly impact how much staff is dedicating to supporting the CAC. So this is the one I was just talking about for the right now work. This is everything that staff spent time on last year multiplied by our billable rates. So monthly meetings, it's about $11,000 for the year. The administrative, including things like applications when we're doing renewals and so on, plus the planning staff support, about $40,000 a year. Total impact about $50,000, but again, the recoverable cost is about half of that. So what we're talking about here is trying to figure out how we can trim down that $25,000 that's being spent, that could be spent on recoverable time. I keep reaching up here to move my PowerPoint forward. I apologize. So kind of a range of ideas for possible solutions. I'm going to present them in the order from the most cost savings to the least cost savings. I'm not saying that any of these are good. Certainly some of them are not preferred. These are preliminary ideas. They haven't been thoroughly evaluated in terms of impact in other work areas. They also haven't been looked at by our new city attorney yet. So these are for discussion purposes only. Possible solutions could use one or more of these ideas. And again, we welcome and encourage your ideas because you're the ones that are doing this work. You're the ones that know what it takes. So the first idea is the No Brown Act idea. So that would be reforming as a body that is not a Brown Act body, which would be an advisory body. And it would involve the city council reconstituting, or the city council disbanding the CAC as it is in its current form, and the director reconstituting it as a director's advisory committee. I know it's out there. That's the one that would have the most cost savings. We'll talk about it a little more in just a minute. The next one is the CAC would be on its own for its Brown Act implementation. So
Can I ask a question, or would you like us to hold our questions till the end?
if you'd hold for just the next set of slides,
Okay.
after this one where we have details on each of
Okay.
these ideas. This is just the intro. The next one is a budget for planning staff. So you have so many hours per month of planning staff time that you can use, and those hours roll over if they're not used. I will note that at the end of the year, when we're doing the recruitment process, that takes a lot of staff hours. So you want to save some for that part. Another idea, and this came from one of the committee members, reducing meeting length or the frequency of meetings. So there, you could meet every other month. You could meet for a shorter period, or staff could support you for a shorter period of time during meetings. And then the last one is the status quo, which saves no money. Next slide, please. So this first one, boy, that's going to be difficult to read. I apologize. As I noted, the council would need to disband the CAC. It would be reformed as a director's ad hoc advisory group in order to not have to meet Brown Act requirements. This is not something we want to do. It's not something we're recommending. I'm just giving you a full range of things that could happen. So the city would continue to provide materials, information at the counter and over the phone. Again, it would be advisory to the director. Additional changes may also be needed to comply with the Brown Act, so we're not falling under that. The adjusted savings for that would be about $20,000. That recovered staff time of about 259 hours a year could be spent in pursuit of economic development incentives and other revenue generating work, with potential for additional city income somewhere between 14 and 16,000 annually. And that's from a variety of kind of the low hanging fruit revenue generating things that we're looking at doing now. The next slide, please. So this is that the CAC does its own Brown Act idea, and you would function kind of like maybe a school board functions. So you would be on your own for complying with the Brown Act. We would come in a couple times a year and say, hey, we remind you guys everything you have to do to comply with the Brown Act. And you'd be on your own for doing that. So you'd be running your own show. We would continue to provide counterphone and website support, but not any meeting support. We would commit to 26 annual hours to prepare a council item, 1 or 2 council items, because you would still need some assistance with bringing ordinances forward, because those have to go planning commission and city council. That has a calculated savings of less than the other one, but an adjusted savings of under $20,000. So saves a little less, but it doesn't, it remains very open and subject to the Brown Act meeting. So there's no implication that there's any backdoor kind of stuff going on. So I like this one better, but it's not my favorite. The staff hours budget idea. So all of the CAC functions and procedures would remain the same, but members would have a monthly staff budget of, let's say, for example, 10 staff hours inclusive of meetings. The hours that aren't used in a month could carry over if they're needed. Calculated savings and adjusted savings are about $20,000 there. The recovered staff time could be, again, spent in pursuit of other revenue generating ideas. Next one. And then here's the less meetings or the shorter meetings idea, or both. Those commitments by staff would be reduced by 50%, either by meeting every other month, providing only 1 hour of assistance per meeting. So you would be kind of still on your own for some of your Brown Act stuff, but we would be providing support as we can. That's roughly a 50% cost savings, but only cost savings on the meetings. You saw that that was a $10,000 a year cost running the meetings. And so if we figure half of that, it would be a $5,000 cost with the calculated savings of about $2,700. So not a lot of savings here. And that recovered staff time obviously would be smaller. And so there's less potential for staff to work on additional revenue generating things. And so that's it for the different meetings, but we're here to hear your questions, and please come up with some other ideas, or merge some ideas, or tell us where we're completely off our rockers or whatever. I just really want to have a really open discussion about this.
So my question was earlier in one of those slides, it named a director. And I didn't know if you meant the planning director or you're meaning there's a director of this board. Who is the director?
Great question. I did mean the planning/community development director. Those are the hours that are calculated in here.
Okay.
Sure, I don't know how we do this.
Sorry, I was assuming you were going to lead your own discussion, but I can't, would you like me to call in people? I'm comfortable just letting you call in
Let's
people.
just have a discussion.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm completely supportive of you using planning for empowering the city and improving the top line, getting more money into the city. I feel like that's super important. And I'm wondering how much autonomy we can have without the Brown Act. We're all capable people here. But I was wondering if there was a bit of a hybrid where we just reduced staff. Like I was thinking maybe Nzosi was just here and, could provide some, report about what the city's up to or some kind of feedback about the things that are being passed, developments that are happening. Because something that we would like to, have influence on is some of the, bigger developments, like if they're near transportation-oriented design, these kinds of things. If we could, offer, our advice on how they can be improved for energy efficiency or something like that. So like if there's just some information coming from the planning department, that's super key. And I don't know how to calculate those hours. But otherwise, I was kind of hoping to, hybridize a couple of those plans so that we were both autonomous, but also compliant with the Brown Act. And I don't know what's necessary for maintaining a website or, these types of things where we can provide our own savings to you, right? So that if we did dial back a certain number of meetings, that we were still able to accomplish, good things. One thing that we had maybe communicated to the town council is that we'd like to meet more often so that we can keep the momentum going for some of these projects that we'd like to do. As you know, 2030 is coming up for our goals and we can't get them. And as a city of 8,000 people, we have a significant opportunity to do things that could affect other cities in California. We have able and willing people here that can do amazing things. Speaking to Steve's point, there's a community member that works for a data organization that can tell us where people are going and how they're going and what they're doing and giving us that information for free. And so we can use that to help make this a more bikeable city. That would reduce demand on both operations and, other environmental costs, on top of meeting our net zero goals. And then, our influence on the two active transportation projects, I feel is significant. And these things take more meeting opportunities so that we can, we all have other lives and we're volunteering. So it's nice to be able to meet on some sort of regular schedule and not limited to some of our micro committees, so that we can pass things through to everybody so that they can be just as surprised as the transportation committee say on some of the things that are going on, because a lot of these things are moving quite fast, through planning and whatnot. So that's the goal that I would have for the Climate Action Committee, is that it stay apprised of the city's momentum, and so that we can work together in tandem, things like that, respecting that you also have a top line to get to, to increase revenue and work on these projects that are going to do things, right? As far as like putting traffic circles or whatever is happening. So like if I had one thing to say, like if we could parse out some of those numbers and maybe help or negotiate like how we can commit, to the Brown Act and still save as much as we can.
So I'm hearing that you're open to a discussion of how we can like mix and match and massage, reduce
completely.
staffing, et cetera.
I feel like
Okay.
that would be most useful.
Is that a shared sentiment? Ahmed?
I have a question just for clarifying some of the differences between these options. So, like I'm noticing the does its own Brown Act concept is a savings of 18,000 some dollars, and then the staff budget idea is a savings of 20,000. And so just trying to kind of understand in that staff budget scenario, the staff would be doing the Brown Act portion
Correct.
still, but yet we save more money. And so like what are we losing that we're getting in the other scenario? I guess in theory, there's maybe more of the planning support outside of meetings happening in the does its own Brown Act scenario and then in the budget.
Yeah,
scenario.
so thank you for asking that question. It's a really good one. There's several ways that the Brown Act makes serving the committee more expensive. For one thing, when there are micro committees doing a lot of work, different members of those committees might reach out to staff in a given week. We might have 3 different members reaching out to staff for data and information. Some weeks that number is 0. Some weeks that number might be 10 hours. It depends on who's reaching out. Because you're a Brown Act body, you can't talk to each other and say, hey, I'm going to be bugging John this week, lay off of him, or let's prioritize our asks of staff this week. You have to do that in a meeting, which is why I think you're saying we have to have more frequent meetings in order to be able to do that. So that's one of the ways that the Brown Act affects just the cost of providing staff services to a committee like this. And you have a very large committee. It's a big one. It's the biggest one that I've seen. Not that that's a bad thing, but that means you've got a lot of excited people doing a lot of really good work. And sometimes they have to rely on staff. And so without a really strong annual plan that everybody is sticking to, even if you have to update it every 3 to 6 months, sticking on the same track and knowing what people are going to be reaching out to staff for. And if we had a staff hours budget, that would be incredibly helpful if we're going to remain Brown Act compliant. If you were to not be a Brown Act body, or if you were going to be a body that does your own Brown Act stuff, then you would be responsible for all of those things. You would be responsible for your meetings, just like a school board. A school board is still a Brown Act body, but they do their own meetings. They're not served by a city. They are doing all their own record keeping. So it would function more like that. I don't have all the details of that. We've also been without a city attorney. So I'm not exactly sure how that would work out, but we would still have that one problem, for example, of you still wouldn't be able to have conversations outside of a properly noticed meeting about who's working with staff to get what information. So that's one of the costs that would continue. Am I making any sense? It's nuanced, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess, yeah. I'm going to mull on that. I mean, I guess I'm wondering like if you can apply the Brown Act concepts to any of the other pieces and get more savings, I guess is kind of partly what I'm thinking. But a second question is just understanding if the tech and Zoom aspects of this meeting are this standard across all of these options, or if there are differences as far as the tech support staff, if that was like a consideration of having a scenario with or without Zoom.
Yeah, just for clarification, we've spent a lot of time in these meetings talking about trying to save costs, and a lot of that conversation has focused on the cost of the Zooms and the cost of having 2 staff people to manage Zoom bombing. So this is a kind of leap because I'm taking I'm assuming, and I think it would be good to state it if I'm correct, that all of these ideas and the cost estimates are already taking into account that there will not be Zoom public comment any longer, and that some of the Zoom costs per meeting have already been kind of taken out of these cost estimates.
So these cost estimates do include, with a couple of exceptions, they do include continued tech at the level that it is right now, except for the you serve as your own Brown Act body or the no Brown Act. Those do not. So you would be still on the hook. We would need to talk to the city attorney about what all we could eliminate, but if you're holding a meeting, you have to be able to take public input. You can say no public input over Zoom. You have to come down here to do it. That's what, that's what Zoom bombing has gotten us. We all have to make it inconvenient for people to participate in public meetings, which is a shame, but that's the way it is. So that's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up for clarification. So the first two biggest, money saving ones would eliminate that aspect, but the rest of them, that would continue in its current format. Yeah.
Thanks for your approach and the conversation about this.
Yeah.
Appreciating this set of options. Just speaking for myself, I have concerns about the first two involving the Brown Act limitations and general support for the latter two about some combination of reducing meeting impact and having a staff budget. Like the latter couple of options are very much things we've been discussing already and are trying to be willing to accommodate and to assist with in whatever way we can. In particular, the first version, what you're calling no Brown Act, of reforming the committee as more of an ad hoc advisory board, it concerns me that would be sort of a fundamental diminishment of our role and our influence within the city that I think would be out of character of the intent of the establishment of the committee initially. Specifically, my feeling so far, having served for 4 years, has been that in our current stance as a committee, we have a right to be in dialogue with multiple departments within the city, in that we can talk to planning, we can talk to council, we can talk to public works, we can talk to other folks as we need to, and we have some way to engage with the planning commission, for instance. And so my feeling is that by going to a position of advising a planning director, necessarily our level of engagement with other aspects of the city government would be reduced. And I just feel that it would be hard to be as effective in that way. The second one about the committee does its own Brown Act version, by which presumably we'd have to figure out how we were documenting our meetings, more or less, and having some public record and some engagement of that, becoming our own videographers or better minutes takers or something along those lines. Yeah, I understand that one. I would just say that so far we have not been very good at that sort of thing, and that's not really part of our mission and focus. And so for that reason, I feel that it's not that preferable, but understand in terms of needing to reduce the staff focus on it, and we would like to be able to support that in some fashion.
Great, super helpful, thank you.
So is this meeting room going to be still available
I think
on
that's our
all
assumption.
options? Is that what you're assuming?
I think that's our assumption.
So even if it was a no Brown Act, this room would still be available for this group?
A do your own Brown Act. Yeah, we'd have to check into it. I don't see any red flags with that, except the presumption that it's a city, sponsored. But school boards use city facilities sometimes. I think it would be okay, but that's one of the things that we haven't fleshed out completely.
Okay. And then in response to something that Phil had said earlier, there is a new program at city council meetings where all the department heads are reporting out. And it's at least once a month. Dawn, you can correct me if it's more than that. So far, we've just had it once. I think it's once a month. And so if we specified that, the directors would consider the groups, for example, the Public Arts Committee and the Climate Action Committee, in their reports, that maybe that would suffice as a report rather than needing to have somebody here, a staff member reporting out, because you would be getting that report. And I think, so we received those reports last week on Tuesday. So it would basically be just 1 week later if the meeting was on the Tuesday. So, and then the other comment is that the council still allows public comments by Zoom. We allow participation by Zoom, and I believe we set the policy for all the groups, but I'm not sure exactly how that works.
I believe that's correct. I also, just on the room availability, I don't think we have any reason to think it wouldn't continue to be available, but it is something we would want to confirm, but I can't see why we wouldn't continue that.
So
But yes, it's council policy.
If this group continued to meet monthly in this room with reduced staff, then what would that save the city? Is that the last scenario that you presented?
That's the reduced, the less meetings one.
But the scenario would be less staff.
2750 roughly.
That would be meeting every other month. But so if we kept meeting monthly and we reduced the need for a staff member, so we just had one staff here for maybe 1 hour, there would be some savings there too. And I think if there was a limit, like I didn't know that any member could reach out to staff. I wasn't aware of that. If there could be limitations on that, I mean, it seems to me that a member could reach out to one of the moderators to run things by, or you could have another moderator, a monthly moderator group where people bring issues up, and the moderator could monitor the time in terms of the questions to staff and stuff, or vet it before it even needs to go to staff. Because that's an idea I hadn't heard, that people were calling on staff. So
as far as having one staff to do everything, I would ask Mr. J to step in. I know he's previously been tasked with trying to do everything at once and hold back Zoom bombers.
Yeah. So, the one person I have ran into it monitoring the design review board meetings where before Zuzi was brought on, it was me running the meeting. I was managing the design review board and then also presenting an item to the design review board and monitoring the Zoom aspect to make sure that there was no Zoom bombers, which we actually had during 2 of our meetings. So it's very time consuming and also a huge disruption to the meeting itself for one person to be in charge of more than one or all 4 aspects of it. So that's, as far as having one person, doing everything is not reasonable.
Right.
So if there was a modification.
I thought at one of our previous meetings, we discussed and voted on not having the Zoom. Is that correct? So if we had council permission to not have the Zoom, then that would be different. You wouldn't need to do that piece too.
So we haven't really voted as a committee, but we've had multiple discussions on this topic and reached some form of consensus or majority opinion about what our ask was, given the ideas and restrictions that we were being presented with. So just framing that conversation a little bit. And those were that it seemed like a likely possibility that council would allow the committees to not have public participation via Zoom, at least public comment via Zoom. The public comment would have to be in person, and that could reduce a full staff member from the meeting, and still leave in-person public participation as an option. But that there would still be a live stream so that people could both watch the meetings if they wanted to, access the recordings, and then that would reduce the problems that we've had in the past with trying to keep good minutes and record the meetings. So for that Brown Act compliance piece. So that was one idea that had gotten broad support from the committee, was reducing the way Zoom is used in the meetings. I don't think we all love having Zoom at all in terms of like, we'd like to sit in a circle, you know, a little bit more like Sebastopolians, but but that's, you know, within the framework of the Brown Act. The other idea that had broader support within the committee was the idea of reducing staff time at the meeting to half of the meeting time. So keeping the meetings monthly to keep the momentum going, as Phil was discussing, but using, you know, strategically using our planning support for planning report and any action items that require that Brown Act level of carefulness. And then, yeah.
Kenny, could you, I'm sorry, but I'm would like to understand, but I'm not understanding. So staff would come for half of the meeting, but the Brown Act piece that you were speaking to, can you elaborate on that or clarify?
Well, so at least my understanding of our position as a recommending body is that our action items are the most important in terms of Brown Act compliance, and if we're making a recommendation to council, that is the most important in terms of, did we ask for public comment at the right time? You know, like all the pieces that staff provides a lot of kind of that logistical support with, and we're getting better at it. We just are not that official. So, so our idea as a group had been, you know, well, what if we got what kind of the stuff we needed from staff, but also had extra time where we're still being recorded. It's still a public meeting. People can still provide public comment, but, you know, let the staff fly free and go do the other things they need to do. Obviously, the recording staff would still have to be here, but in terms of the actual management staff. So that was an idea that had been floated.
So it really wouldn't be half of the staff time per meeting, because the recording staff, support technical staff would still be here.
Right. So currently we have 3 staff, right? 2 planning and 1 tech. And so this would be 1 tech and half of a planning. So in terms of, if you're just looking at the number of people, the cost of each of those people is not necessarily the same, but these are, I'm just telling you what we've discussed in the past and what we've had.
This is without Zoom.
What we've tried to figure out without Zoom public comment. So with
Still live streaming.
yeah, and that idea didn't come from us even, I don't think. Like the idea of stopping public comment from Zoom. That seemed like an idea that, I don't know where that came from.
So to be clear, yes, we are talking about video documentation staff as distinct from planning staff. We're talking about going from 2 planning staff there for 2 hours of the meeting to 1 planning staff for 1 hour of the meeting. So it's a reduction to 1 hour of planning time as opposed to 4 hours. I don't know if it makes much difference with respect to Brown Act or to video tech engagement as to whether it's live streamed or simply recorded and posted to the web later on that evening. If we agree that we don't have to take public comment from Zoom, that we can take public comment in person, and that the video becomes the minutes and documentation of the meeting, I'm not sure if it has to be posted live at the time of the meeting. And perhaps if that requirement is lessened, that might simplify the degree of tech that is needed. So just to say that. I also, along those lines, want to highlight the suggestion that came up recently that there are going to be regular, I think weekly or bi-weekly, staff reports from the various departments, which is to say planning, council, et cetera. And so that idea that if we were receiving those reports, which the city is already providing to its departments as part of our agenda packet ahead of time, that would eliminate the need for city staff to be doing the planning report, doing the city council report, which frees up 15 or 20 minutes at the beginning of our meeting. Then we can quickly get through sort of any business items or action items that directly interact with staff. And then we can let staff leave halfway or perhaps even earlier during the meeting, and we can go to more discussion-based items in the committee that are not yet to the point of action items.
So you're talking about receiving the departmental reports that the city council receives as of last week?
So yes, but I do want to clarify that last meeting, we did ask if those reports could replace the reports we're getting. And I believe the opinion of planning staff at last meeting, John, maybe you remember as well as I do, was that they were not the equivalent, or they weren't the information that we would be looking for necessarily. So it's a little unclear to me whether those reports can or cannot. I heard Sandy say like we could kind of ask for those reports to be prepared, those monthly, I believe they're monthly, in a way that would take into account the committees that might be able to use them in place of other reports. But we were told that that wouldn't be a good substitute.
Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I have a question for Jane, but I also, just in response to what Kenna and Joshua were just adding in, I think one takeaway for me is that even if we got rid of all staff at all meetings, it would only save the city $5,000 a year. So it may be, sort of moot to quibble over whether there's half staff for half a meeting and that kind of thing. I don't know how much, but I wanted to get back to my question. I think maybe I can articulate it better now about the difference between, trying to understand the difference between the Do Your Own Brown Act. So correct me if I'm wrong, but the Do Your Own Brown Act has this calculated savings of 37,000 pre-adjusted, and then the meetings cost for the whole year is 10,000. So does that imply that the cost of administering the Brown Act outside of meetings is $27,000 a year for the staff?
That's probably not precise, but I think that's a good call. Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's right around in that range.
So then if we go down to the staff budget hours idea, which has a calculated savings of 40,000, I'm wondering if that's continuing to have the staff administer the Brown Act for the board, how can we save 40,000 if $27,000 is the cost of administering the Brown Act
So
outside of meetings?
the cost of administering the Brown Act at meetings is still included in the staff budget ideas. It's the difference is all of the other things that the fact that you are an established Brown Act committee, those costs that are in addition to the things that we're currently doing.
Yeah, I guess I'm seeing that out of the total $50,000 cost of supporting the board, the savings would be 40,000 for that option. And I'm wondering how that's possible if we are still having to administer the Brown Act, which from the other option sounded like it was $27,000 a year. Does anyone else follow me, or am I not making sense?
I think there's a lot of staff hours outside of meeting time that if we're doing our full own Brown Act, like we're posting our agendas, we're doing all of that saves a lot more time than just the meeting time.
Right, $27,000 apparently.
So,
but in the other option where we just have a budget, we shouldn't be saving that 27,000. So,
right. So we only have,
So
like the number, I guess another way of asking this question is, of those 10 staff hours that are written here as a potential monthly budget, how many of those are needed to run a monthly meeting?
That's part of what I'm getting
that's the key. And I think the question, what we're trying to answer here is, if you get a 10-hour a month budget and it's these people or some other combination of people, you guys have already given us some great ideas for when you need the director, when you can just use a technician, which obviously has a lower cost. If you have 10 hours a month and you're taking 2.5, or you've got it down to 1.5 now for a meeting, that frees up a lot more staff hours than we're using right now, having 2 people for 2 hours at every meeting. It frees up a lot more staff hours to do other things. So you would divide up your staff hours however you want to. So if you're doing a combination of a staff hours budget, if you will, or staff hours diet, if you're doing a combination of that and reduce staff support and participation in meetings, then those budget hours will go further.
I guess part of where I was going with my question is, are those 10 hours, 10 staff hours going to be used for the general Brown Act administering outside of meetings, or is that separate from that 10-hour budget, weekly or monthly budget? Does that make sense? Because if they are used for just administering the Brown Act, which sounds like it does take, it's fairly intensive for staff, then it sounds like to me that those 10 hours would be used all up before we could
Well, it doesn't have to
consult
be
with-
10 either. I mean, we could come up with, this is just an idea that we're throwing out there. Would you be willing to entertain a set number of staff hours, whether it
Sure.
includes staff hours spent in meetings, staff hours spent in requests of staff hours spent in recruitment of committee members? At the end of the year, reports to city council, ordinances.
That makes
Can
sense, and maybe what
Can we just look at, I'm just confused by
Yeah.
the numbers you're referencing.
Yeah.
So when I'm looking at the does its own Brown Act idea, I
Mhm.
see a calculated savings of 37,960.
Right.
And then when I look at the staff hours budget, it's 40,000. So it's not, I'm not understanding the discrepancy that you're calling out.
Well, because I'm saying that does its own Brown Act implies like eliminating all the meeting costs, right? That's the implication of that. And plus other Brown Act expenses. And so the meeting costs are 10,000. So that implies the other Brown Act costs are 27,000. And anyway, but I guess I think just to what might be helpful would be a breakdown of like what are the staff costs for administering the Brown Act, both within the meetings and outside the meetings, so that we can then understand, like if we do come up with a budget for staff hours, if we need to decide what that budget is, like how much of that would be just already off the table because of administering the Brown Act
It's going to be difficult to do that, to go back and do that over the prior year, which is that, to do an apple
Sure.
comparison, because I wasn't here and I don't know, I can't tie all those things together. If this committee is actually considering going to a non-Brown Act or do your own Brown Act, then I think it's worth spending the time to go through and try to do that calculation. If that's not something that you're willing to entertain, then I don't think it's worth trying to go through and do that calculation.
Can we get a quick room read of, because I mean, I'm like, oh, it's very interesting to run out this thought experiment of what is the no Brown Act idea, and like would there be other benefits of having more flexibility that would increase community participation, all these questions. But if this is, we don't need to spend time on things that people are like definitely not.
Right.
So can we just have a thumbs up, thumbs down really quickly on the no Brown Act idea?
I would just like to ask just a quick question. What you're kind of seeing is a little bit of like a la carteness on our part.
Love
And I'm
that.
wondering if there exists a spreadsheet where we might be able to do some homework on our own where we don't take staff time, or if that's a fair thing to ask. I'm not sure. But maybe, or what's allowable, to help us come up with a budget that, we can work on to save you time so that
It's not something that exists now. And certainly we could come up with a worksheet or something but again, that's more staff time spent.
So
getting
I have
to that.
another question relevant to your question, which is, what is a timeline for when you guys need to present a staff report to council on this issue?
I would like to get the council by the second meeting in September, at the latest, the first meeting in October.
Very
So there's potential for one more climate action committee meeting, but noted, we have spent a lot of time on this issue over
That's,
several
we
meetings.
are, we have budgeted money associated with this, which we are not able to get. And so our budget hole gets a little bit bigger the longer that we wait. I don't, to the extent there's value in waiting and cooking this some more, then I want to honor that. But when you ask about, at least from a staff perspective, my goal is to get it to the council no later than October 1st.
Can I jump in? Because I just noticed something in the numbers that maybe explain why I'm confused, but the calculated savings listed for the staff budget idea is exactly the same as the amount listed for the No Brown Act idea, but the recovered staff time is much less. And I'm wondering if there was a typo there.
Oh, you know what? I bet it was.
Because that's where I'm like,
carryover.
I'm like, I love the staff budget idea because it saves just as much money as getting rid of the Brown Act altogether, and we still get some hours and we get the Brown Act. But that's why I'm like, this seems somehow like it's too good to be true.
I can't even read my stinking thing. Yeah, that very well could be. I may have sent over a previous version. I have a memo that I'm preparing for the city manager that he hasn't seen yet that has these numbers broken down in more detail. I can go back and check that and we can get it. We're fine, like getting them information after a meeting, right? Okay. I'll get those numbers back out to you.
I'm in the camp of we probably do need the Brown Act in some version or other, so not trying to too seriously entertain those first two options. But just to clarify, in terms of what we're talking about, time that staff spends outside of meetings related to Brown Act conformance, the things I think of are sort of posting the meeting agenda, perhaps taking some public comment if they end up at the wrong email address, and then kind of posting or being sure that the website and the online part of the public accessibility of the meeting is functional. Are there any other pieces that I'm missing that are significant in terms of staff time? Perhaps John and Susie would have experience of what they're ending up having to do related to Brown Act outside of meetings, because we're not super clear on that.
I would say just like as far as facilitating questions and stuff like that go, we do, it does happen occasionally with all of the groups. Somebody will reply all to something that is sent out or sends it out to the entire committee. And, kind of that reassurance of, hey, this can go to staff first and then it can go out to the rest of the committee. So those kind of gentle reminders are sometimes reoccurring. And then just as far as, groups that reach out as far as projects go and stuff like that, making sure that, the working groups are confined to less than a quorum number and all of that kind of stuff. So they're very finite, kind of meticulous things that we have to look at and make sure, and then send out reminders if there is I don't want to call it violation, but a misstep.
And I think what I kind of alluded to earlier with the different micro committees reaching out and that lack of coordination, which really can't take place like you would like it to take place because of the Brown Act. I think if we tightened that up, we'd have a much lower cost related to Brown Act compliance, and that's something that we probably should do anyway. You're sitting right next to me and we haven't even talked yet.
Yeah, I remember that when we started talking about the crisis, there was a list of ideas that I think the city manager put out. And one was about the Public Art Committee. Can it not work with the Center for the Arts? I'm not sure whether that idea went anywhere. But I think for me, the question right now is, how do we organize climate action in the city? And there's a big financial issue that we kind of focused on. But we have carbon conversations. We have volunteer groups, nonprofits that work in the very same area.
Yes.
And could we not kind of step back and see how can we restructure our work as a city and include Sebastopol in the transportation action, carbon compensation in the educational section, the Center for the Arts in working on decisions around placing of things. So this is a very different kind of remark that I make. It's not about these numbers. But it's kind of, I feel that we're staring ourselves blind on dollars and cents, and we need to really go back to where we came from and decide as a city how we organize climate action in the city. Are there new ways for public, city, and citizen action to work together in these different areas of our concern for the 2030 goal?
So are you thinking that maybe some of the work that, for example, the micro committees are doing could be done in concert with citizen groups and other groups that are out there already doing similar work, and that would be in their work realm instead of the CAC's?
That could be one
Brown
way
Act
to fill this in,
work.
yeah. So we could ask Carbon Conversations, who has a
Right.
monthly meeting,
Right.
and does outreach around carbon, goes to table and different events, to take on the educational part of the city's mission. And similarly with some of the other things, we could look more at the details of our plan and think about where else do we have resources and energy in the city to work on this colossal task.
For sure.
So that's my kind of input here.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Zeno. It's always good to pull back and look from the wide angle lens.
Yeah, yeah. Refreshing.
And I think that's a great opener. If we get to our work plan conversation today, I want to bring that idea back. Although there's not that many of us here to talk about our work plan. I still, even though Phil had to leave, I'd love to get just a sense from the room of whether we want to put any more discussion into the idea of, like, into any of these ideas. So I'm just going to go through them one by one and get like a thumbs up, thumbs down. So is there anybody in the room who wants to continue exploring the idea of the No Brown Act idea, where we would be dissolved in the current form and become an ad hoc advisory body for the needs of the as yet to be hired director? I can take public comment for that, and will you please advise if we need to loop in anyone from Zoom at this point? So actually, I just would like a thumbs up, thumbs down from the.
It's just about that.
Okay, go ahead.
So I was part of the group that set up the whole committee originally, and in retrospect, I think we kind of made some mistakes. We weren't very clear on the roles and responsibilities of this group. And it's shown over the years where there's been numerous things that have come up before the city were prime examples of us to provide our expertise. For instance, electric car charging at the Burnett Street lot. The city was all about to put in these electric car chargers that would not have been what we were looking for, at least as this the climate committee and most likely the city. So in a lot of ways, the No Brown Act does give us a chance to think about what are the roles and responsibilities of this committee. None of the other options do. I'm not necessarily, I'm wholeheartedly in favor of that because there's a lot of actions that we'd have to take to fulfill those requirements. But it should be looked at as an opportunity to step back, like Zeno was saying, and look, what should we be doing? How should the city be using this committee? Because quite honestly, they're not.
Thanks, Steve. So I saw a thumbs down from Emmett on continuing to discuss. I believe, your thumbs sideways, your thumbs almost down. Joshua, I think your public comment was full on. I mean, your comment earlier. Sandy, do you have a feeling about? Yeah. Yeah, I'm just getting a temperature gauge here. Zaino, do you have,
I don't like it.
you don't like it? Okay, yeah, I'm sideways on that one. But so let's try to focus our conversation on the solutions that we find the most meaningful. And do I need to call, sorry, public on Zoom, I'll call for public comment on this issue of, do we want to consider the option of becoming a non-Brown Act body?
Adam Salmon, you can unmute.
So we're now taking public comment on the issue of whether to consider becoming a non-Brown Act body. Please unmute if you are on Zoom and are hoping to make a public comment about this issue.
Yeah, you must have a half an hour. So you may go on.
Okay, am I waiting long enough? Okay, I think we'll close public comment on this issue. Is there anyone in the room who can give me a thumbs up, thumbs down about the idea of doing our own Brown Act, becoming responsible for our own Brown Act, just temperature gauge?
Yeah, I'm in favor of that.
You are in favor?
Yeah. Mm.
Sideways, few downs. Okay, how about the option of, oh, thank you for putting that up, the budget for planning staff hours? They know?
Yeah, and I was completely confused of the real savings for that, because it seemed that the point about it takes so much money to do the Brown Act that the projected savings seems to be empty. So I don't think this particular has been presented well.
And the idea of reducing meeting length or frequency, thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways.
Well, that almost has no saving. I'm not in favor of that.
Yeah. What about a hybrid of a budget for planning staff and reducing meeting length or frequency?
If we go with a budget, you can choose how you want to use that budget. So if you really feeling the need for planning staff attendance for some especially important or staff-heavy items on the agenda, then you can use more of the staff budget. And if you're just cruising along doing your regular stuff, you can use less staff hours. I mean, you could say, thanks, staff, we got it from here. Go on and go back to your work.
So if we're leaning towards this idea of a planning staff budget, hours budget, do we have questions, since we have our city manager and our interim community development director here in the room with us? What questions do we have for them? And John Jay is also here. Zuzi's also here. We have so much expertise in the room. I think my main question is, for 10 staff hours, if we had a 2-hour meeting, for instance, without taking Zoom comment, how much time would be left for us to access staff expertise for questions or other items, or preparing but items for council?
I'm hearing under that scenario, when we're just recording a webinar, I'm hearing probably like 8.5 hours left in a month. And again, if you're not using it, that would be over a year. So if you're not using them in 1 month, they would be available.
And it takes about 13 hours. I think I read that into one of your slides, to prepare an item for council.
It completely depends on the item. When we're doing something easy, preparing for interviews and those sorts of things, they're simple. But when we're doing something that requires iterative work, like the nature rights ordinance, where we're, reviewing that and providing feedback. When there's an iterative process, it's more like 40. So it's really significantly dependent on the work that the CAC is moving forward in that time frame.
And how many hours are hardwired for things like the required recruitments and those kind of processes that we really don't have control over?
More Brown Act processes. Susie, how many hours do you think we're?
I would say about maybe an hour or 2 hours.
Per?
More than that. Let's say if
An hour per application.
for application. Okay.
So annually, an hour per application for all of the recruitments that happen annually.
Or just
Well, I mean, yeah, just, we don't care about everyone. So any other questions about this, the details of this staff hours budget idea? I mean, I'm assuming that it would require working groups to be clear about work plan and for there to be a centralized, probably chair-run budget allocation to, I mean, the budget allocation can be done by the whole group, but chair-run kind of, okay, yes, we're using this many hours, reaching out to chair, have we used our hours for this yet? Kind of budgeting process. And so it might feel restrictive to groups that have been needing a lot of staff expertise or a lot of questions answered by staff. So just any questions that we have about this is our time to dig in.
That's really the area of the highest concern to me. I am really supportive of the budget hours. I think that's the most flexible thing that we can do while still having a significant impact on the budget. But my concern is just what you've stated. We have members who are out there doing a lot of good work, and they're used to having a certain level of support, and they're used to kind of some autonomy, and to have to come back and kind of constrain efforts into a more rigid work plan, because you've got to do all this as a Brown Act body. You've got to do all this in a public notice meeting. So you can't just say, okay, so you get to have conversations with these people and decide what you're going to spend the money on. So it's going to have to be more regimented than it, I want it to feel more organic than it does. It's just going to have to be more regimented. And I think that may be difficult until we get into the habit of a really good structured annual work plan that's maybe updated quarterly or every 6 months. Because as we know, needs change, priorities change. That might be something you just agendize quarterly. Am I making sense? I want to check with him.
I want to check with him too. Like, John has been watching our meetings for how many years now? And I think you know this group pretty well. And I'm curious what you think would work.
I think the budgeted option is probably the easiest way to kind of maintain the group as how you want to continue to move forward and still have a meaningful effect on the city and all that kind of stuff. I guess the only concern that I have with the budgeted part is, like kind of Jane alluded to, is making sure that everything is fed into some sort of moderator. Is that moderator, does that turn into a staff person, and then those hours get increased because they're monitoring how much stuff is coming in from the other members of the group. So I do have a couple concerns with that. I mean, I know we're not going to have just this perfect solution, but trying to make it as easy as possible with the limited staff that we have and, the hours that all groups, are need and need support for. So I think probably the budgeted hours is probably the best solution, but I just don't know how the administration of those hours work to where it's not also creating more hours, monitoring the hours of the budget. So
What if the department report that's going to the city council monthly now reported how many staff hours were spent in the last month on different committees?
I think that could be helpful.
Is that what you were thinking too? We'd be running a month behind, but that's okay.
I'm also wondering if there's been any consideration of reducing the committee size to, for example, if we had 7 committee members, you would have less problems if there was not a quorum, for example. There'd be less need for recruitment. And I know there are some vacancies right now that aren't filled. So if you just, I don't know, just an idea.
Interestingly, I spoke with Phoebe today. You all remember Phoebe, and she says hi. And that was her first recommendation. She's in Corte Madera with a 6-person CAC right now.
Do we feel like the question of number of members of the committee is essential to this other question that we're trying to discuss today? Does it seem very relevant?
I think it's not agendized for discussion today. I think it's a bigger discussion than just the budget discussion. It's kind of, the step back and take a look at what we're supposed to be doing. I think it's an appropriate thing to agendize for discussion when we talk about the work plan. I don't think it has that big of a budget impact.
We do have a guest presenter on the agenda. I just want to check in. There's a gentleman here. Are you Gavin?
yes.
Okay. Sorry. So we do have a guest presenter here, and I want to make sure that we have time for him. I'd love for this to be our last discussion of this. What are we doing to help with the fiscal crisis and continue our work in the best way? And I think that how do we continue our work in the best way conversation is hardwired into our work plan conversation, which is bound to be tabled, at least part of it, until next month. Do our city staff here feel like you have any other questions for the members present? I'm sure you might be hearing from other members of the committee or members of the public who will watch the recording and send you their own thoughts. But do you have any questions for who's here today?
I'm not sure if I do have a question. Have we got it right? So let me tell you what I think right looks like. So what I'm hearing is that the staff recommendation, and I think I'm hearing consensus from the members of the Climate Action Committee here, is to go to the city council. Our job is to give them options. They set direction, we do whatever they say. But so we would give them some options, kind of along the lines of what Jane was talking about. But I think we're agreeing with the recommendation where you are, which is to establish a budget of staff hours to be used at the committee's discretion. Essentially, it to be 120 hours over the course of the year, so things can be moved from month to month to deal with things like the peak for recruitment. And so that's sort of the fundamental of the recommendation. I also heard there were some questions that we wanted to follow up on and make sure our understandings are correct. One is the availability of the room. Is that continue as is? And the question about can we not require or maybe not allow public comment on Zoom, but still keep the live stream and still be compliant with the Brown Act? I think that's a piece we need to close up. One other piece that I have, I want to confirm is that there's no written minutes required. want to make sure I have that right. I think that's the case, but I do want to get a legal confirmation of that. Yes.
I would just add to that the question of whether the stream needs to be live or whether it can be recorded and posted in case that makes a difference.
Okay. Thank you. So to me, that we have 4 questions to answer. That's one of them. And then we have a report to develop and bring to the city council in the September 3rd, I'm sure won't work for the council agenda. So 17th or October 1st, I think would be our goal. Are we all consistent with that? Is there anybody who mischaracterized anything?
I would suggest waiting until the October, first week in October. That way, this committee can have another look at it. A final look with a quorum and vote, et cetera. Yeah.
So far, we have not tried to do an action voting item on this issue. We've been more taking the consensus of the larger group, including our members of the public who are regular participants, as a guide in running the staff report. Do other members of the committee besides Sandy feel like we should bring this back next month? Or so just thumbs up, thumbs down, you'd like to see this come back next month? Half and half. Okay. Maybe we'll do a short version.
Yeah, I'm envisioning that what we bring back is more like what we're planning to recommend to the city council, and then you give your input on that.
Perfect. Yeah.
Is
If we can get our, mitts on the draft staff report, or at least the framework that you're planning to build your staff report on.
Yeah, we wouldn't release the staff report to you before it goes to the city council, but the framework, exactly, so that you can make your recommendation. Yeah.
All right.
Does that make sense?
I would love to close up this item unless someone has, Don, were you wanting to say something?
Thank you for the opportunity. I hope you feel heard. I hope we continue with your important work and in a way that works for everybody. So,
Well,
thank you for your time and your.
Want to reiterate Joshua's earlier gratitude for your approach, your framing, your presence, your attitude, who you are, and what you're bringing to the conversation. So very grateful for the time. I know you have lots of other things on your plate. So thank you for coming.
If you don't have a planet, none of that matters.
All right. So thanks for showing up, Gavin. Sorry that you had to listen to our extended conversation. So we have 27 minutes left in our meeting. I would love to prioritize Gavin's report. Gavin, do you think you could keep it to about 15 minutes? Yeah. Okay, great. And then we will do an abbreviated staff report, council report at the end, and we'll table other items on the agenda. Okay, and Joshua will make one announcement at the end. Yes.
Real quick, we don't have a planning commission meeting this evening, so if you guys do need to extend a little bit further, we can
Okay.
go a little bit further.
We're not depriving of your meals.
No.
You know how I feel about that.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you. Gavin, we would love to hear from you. So, yes, unfortunately, that's where the microphone is. So just to clarify to everyone, this is regular agenda item C about countywide pedestrian and bicycle committee work that's happening.
Yep. Hi. And Gavin Waters. I'm the city appointed citizen representative to the SCTA CB PAC. So Citizens Bike Pedestrian Advisory Committee. Yeah. So, and I sent out some notes, which I realized came out last night. And so I'll just cover roughly what was in those notes. I try and make an effort to send those to the council and include other folks when I send them out. So the last meeting of the CB was did not have a quorum, so there were no voting items on the agenda. But the voting items were just approval of minutes from the past meeting anyway, so not really that big of a deal in my mind. Sure, others might disagree. So I think the major part of the presentation was from Caltrans talking about their update of the Bay Area bicycle plan for first time in the last 12 years. So it's very interesting to have Caltrans there. And I made a comment at the meeting that a lot of us in the bicycle community kind of see Caltrans as like the boogeyman of doing this type of work, because they appear to be very focused on the automobile and considerations for getting traffic in and around and so forth. And the representative assured me that that is not the case, that they are interested in bicycle and pedestrian mobility, and maybe that reputation is a bit deserved based on some of their past actions. So but that was interesting. They provided links, which I believe I put in my written notes, for survey items. There's several items that they had, projects that they had recommended along 12. So those would, not directly impacting Sebastopol, but impacting areas that, are nearby to us in Sonoma County that, as commuters, we probably use regularly. So, and then there were some updates about the county active transportation plan, time frame for that. All of the public work sessions and comment sessions have closed out, ending in June, and their consultants are analyzing all of those comments, and they expect draft plans around September. And I believe the city ATP is also, City of Sebastopol, I should specify, also expected around September, October timeframe. So that's something to be on the lookout for. From my perspective, I wanted to bring up Bike Sebastopol concerns about traffic lights belonging to Caltrans in the city, and the responsiveness of those traffic lights to bicyclists who are waiting. So we may have made a connection where the Caltrans representative could assist with that. That's something that Bike Sebastopol will be following up on. They talked a little bit about a bike share program that they're rolling out. I think there's more information about what they aim to achieve on their website, the SETA, that is. But they said that that's still in the works. They've hired a local person to facilitate that program. And, I think they've started to compile a list of locations where they're going to have the bike share. So that's like I said, a program that's sponsored by the SETA. And then there was various other updates. Cotati is going to have a measure to bring back roundabouts on the ballot this fall. In case you didn't know, Cotati had outlawed roundabouts. Kind of an odd thing, but there it is. And then there were some other odds and ends from the meeting that might have covered a little bit more detail from my notes. So, but just be happy to take any questions and see, what kind of information maybe I could present or be on the lookout for in the future with these meetings that would support your agenda with the Climate Action Committee.
I'd like to get any information on grants that the SCTA has. If you could keep me informed or keep the city informed.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
And that is something that they bring up periodically. I think 2 meetings ago, they talked about grants. So I would have detailed those in my notes. I'd be happy to re-forward those, and I'll also be on the lookout in the future. So yeah, usually there's, a pretty good portion of those meetings is dedicated to updates from different folks from different municipalities. So there's a lot of ideas that are kind of put back and forth, and sharing that happens, including opportunities for grants. So
Yeah, I wonder whether you have any desires, requests to make your work more effective from the city. I know that there's a staff person at this meeting too from Sebastopol sometimes.
John's.
And so,
John's usually there. Yep.
I don't know, we talked about the use of staff a bit here today.
Mhm.
But is there, do you feel you're supported by the city in your work? What is on your wish list for getting more details or more pointers or more into the city? And how do you see the work of Bike Sebastopol and the city and this committee and you interact?
Yeah. So, I definitely feel supported. John's taken a lot of time to sit down with me, and, we often have a dialogue before the meeting. So, I think there's a lot of opportunity in Sebastopol, from a pedestrian's perspective and a bicyclist's perspective. Some things that I, off the top of my head, the city has a minimum parking ordinance. So anytime there's a new development, there has to be so many parking spaces, dedicated for those developments. I think that it would probably be worthwhile to take a look at that and see if it's something that is still relevant. Many municipalities and the state of California are kind of eliminating those parking minimums. And, I think it's maybe related to the Climate Action Committee, because providing ample free parking, encourages kind of like a driving lifestyle, vice making that convenient, maybe encourages people to drive their cars, vice taking a bicycle or walking. And this town is really perfect for, cycling and walking places. It's one of the reasons I moved here with my family, opportunity to walk downtown to the farmer's market and so forth. So that's something that I think, the city should definitely consider. Also, looking at revenue generation from parking. Virtually all of the parking is free in Sebastopol. So, being free, it's essentially subsidized, and also a missed revenue opportunity for the city. And pricing parking in a market respect rolls some of that cost into the decision calculus that's made by people when they're deciding, should I drive or should I walk downtown? And of course, I have realized in my short time here working on this issue that there are many people that rely on their vehicles for mobility to get downtown and do the kinds of things that, I enjoy biking or walking to. So I think that, there should be exceptions in those cases. And, in terms of overlap with the Climate Action Committee, I think that in my mind, that is the most obvious thing that the committee can can advocate for or do at this point is reducing the number of car trips in and around Sebastopol. Because I think when it comes down to it, any mile bicycled or walked or rolled instead of driven is, one more mile for the climate.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I'm here.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of overlap between cycling and the Climate Action Committee, as I'm sure many of you probably recognize. In terms of Bike Sebastopol, I mean, I'm not really the leader of the Bike Sebastopol group. It's kind of like a democratic assemblage. But my personal objectives are to formalize that group a little bit more and increase the membership from about 33 persons as it is now to around 100. And, sometime in the next 6 to 8 months. And, something that we discussed on our meeting last evening as well.
Thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for your patience.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sharing this with us. It's so helpful to not be working in silos and not know what each other are doing.
Yeah.
So really appreciate your presence. Does anybody have one more minute of question for Gavin? Or Gavin, do you have a quick question for us?
Well, I guess, I haven't seen what the committee has been working on recently, but is cycling and pedestrian activity a major part of that? And, what kind of initiatives do you have coming up for advocating for that?
Gosh, Emmett, do you want to do a quick summary, or Zaino, do you want to do a quick summary? 1 minute of everything you're doing.
Well, I think e-bike is a potential growth market in Sebastopol, especially for people my age and younger. I'm between 60 and my age. I think that could be helpful because I live on top of a hill and I'm still biking on my own power right now, but that will not long be the case anymore. So I think cargo and e-biking could be a market, and we have invited people to bring ideas out how we can encourage that and stimulate that. I think part of it is that we could have more commercial
Zaino,
examples of that.
sorry, I know John said we could stay, but I want to respect people's time. So we do have a work plan that we're going to be reviewing soon. And I think, is there someone on the transportation committee who could commit to corresponding with Gavin about, kind of the work, the results of that conversation of what our current projects are for transportation? I don't know if you want to say 20 seconds on Vision Zero.
Yeah, I'd be happy to follow up with you, Gavin, about it. And also, I don't know if you've been invited to our kind of working group. I have been sort of MIA from it a lot lately, so you may have even attended in my absence, but you'd be welcome to join that too.
Yeah, I think the time may not be great for Gavin when we meet.
Yeah, it's hard for me to, and schedule's about to get a lot more complicated too. So, and I apologize for not coming to speak sooner to the Climate Action Committee. But yeah, I definitely like to collaborate, and maybe if there's 1 or 2 point people that I can work with outside of a formal meeting structure, that would be good. And definitely happy to represent anything that you need conveyed to the SCTA and the CBPAC. So.
Great, thank you. Susie, we didn't call for public comment at the end of that other discussion since it wasn't an action item. Do I need to repair that? Do we need to call? I guess my question is, do I need to call for public comment now? Okay, because they're all just discussions. Okay. Oh, well, if I'm taking public comment, I think it's, the Zoom would be in line to be the next public comment. So we'll go ahead and take public comment on either of the last two items, a discussion about the committee recommendations for council from city manager and the countywide pedestrian and bicycle committee work. So if anyone on Zoom would like to unmute and share a public comment, please do so at this time. And seeing none, hearing none, I will call back to the room to Steve for a very brief public comment.
Yeah, Gavin, a question to you. It sounds like the main funding source will be the Go Sonoma money for whatever the SCTA ends up deciding to do. My understanding is there's now, with Go Sonoma, there's a 15% required match by the city to do anything. So it seems like it behooves us to prioritize, given that we may have a hard time coming up with 15% of anything. So trying to find what gives us the biggest bang for our little buck would be appropriate. And just a little bit of history, the city actually did have parking meters in downtown. I think it was in the 80s. Merchants lost a bunch of business. It all got ripped out shortly thereafter. Just a little historical context. That's it.
Thank you, Steve. All right. So we've got 10 minutes for planning department reports and council report. But go planning.
Everything earlier was not enough. So I do have a couple updates on some development projects. The Hotel Sebastopol City Council did approve a development agreement with them, which extends their planning entitlements and building permits for another 3 years. I think I may have mentioned this in the last meeting. I don't think so. Okay. So I'll skip over that one real quick. The Hotel Barlow Hotel did submit a formal application. We're reviewing their documents right now. They also submitted a development agreement with the city to go through some of their approvals. So we're working together with the Barlow on that. The Canopy project, which was the 80-unit townhomes at the north end of town behind the O'Reilly buildings, they submitted their grading plans last week. So they'll be starting that work. They are hopeful. We do have kind of like a project timeline schedule with them. They're hoping to have building kind of foundation plans approved by the end of this winter, with the possibility of starting some foundation construction on their units there, either late winter this year or early winter of next year. And the Woodmark project, which is on Bodega Avenue, they are looking at final inspection for their first phase, which is 48 units, hopefully by the end of this month. So they'll be then moving some of those units to rental, and then working on the second phase of that project. And then lastly, the Huntley Square, which is just down the street from the Woodmark project on Bodega Avenue, pulled their grading permits. Those are the 10 studio units that are all electric, eco, net zero friendly units. And as far as other projects go, the Sustainable Transportation Grant, we did have the 2 stakeholder meetings last month. We will be having more of those as the project progresses. The consultant is working on the participation plan, and then they'll be doing some of their existing conditions work, which looks at traffic counts and stuff like that down that Main Street corridor, and then some of the connector streets. Within the next couple of weeks, they wanted to ensure that they caught times for when school was back in session, so that numbers were accurate in that regard. And then the active transportation plan that Gavin mentioned, we are still working on that. I believe we will be getting kind of a third presentation to our planning commission with the kind of draft and final or draft plans that will eventually go to city council as a formal recommendation sometime in the near future. That project does have kind of an end terminus date of February of 25. So part of that final process or that final leg is to develop kind of project plans and policies and stuff like that. And then also they'll be providing funding opportunities for implementation of those projects and plans and policies and stuff. So we will also be having the recruitment for open positions for all the boards and commissions coming in October. We did have a youth application that I've been kind of holding on to, and I've reached out to the youth applicant to let them know that we haven't forgot about you. We're just waiting to follow through, and so those will open in October. They run for about 6 weeks for recruitment, and then so if anybody is, we'll let you know if your terms are coming up. If you do want to reapply, we can send you your previous application, and then council will do appointments, usually December-ish, January. So happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Any questions? All right, council report.
Okay, just a couple of things. We adopted the 2024-25 budget, and I had talked about this late, but we adopted it. I had talked about this at one of our previous meetings, and the $20,000 for replacing the police lawn with drought-tolerant landscaping was not supported by council, unfortunately, but I still have hopes that maybe we could get a native plant garden in there and maybe a volunteer group to help replace that lawn. The $15,000 for the reflective sign poles at crosswalks was reduced to $5,000. But the Public Works Director told me that they've been ordered and they will be installing these reflective poles around schools. So these are at stop signs and at crosswalks, and they light up that pole at night. And when your lights hit that, anyway, I think they're really helpful, making walking a little bit safer. I did volunteer to serve on the Garbage Services Ad Hoc Committee, and it will be myself and Councilmember Joe McLewis. We will be reviewing, I think there are 2 proposals for garbage services, and one of them, Recology, and then another one that serves Windsor right now. And so we're starting our meetings tomorrow on that. No, Thursday. We'll start on Thursday. And then lastly, I just wanted to make a personal comment. Well, 2. I want to thank Steve for your idea about the survey and about the stores. I think that would be really helpful for the city also to find out why people are going to Santa Rosa. The other thing was, thank you, Gavin, for your report, was that my comment on your report was, so I live on the west side of town. So for me to come into City Hall, it's about a 30-minute walk down to City Hall. And I'm aspiring to do better about walking and riding my bike. But this week I drove halfway and then I walked halfway. So I think it's a start. I think if people knew that it's, if you can't go the whole way, go part way, So I just wanted to mention that because it actually felt good to do that. So.
All right, any questions for Councilmember Mauer? All right, well, thank you, Gavin, again for coming. Thank you, planning staff and tech staff and council for being here and your infinite patience with our long process of figuring out how we're moving forward. But we will go ahead and take agenda items for next meeting from anyone, and then we will adjourn. Any agenda items for next meeting? Oh, and Joshua has an announcement.
Yeah, just a quick little working group update for things not on the agenda. I have set the dates for the fall compost events. It's the second Saturday in September and October. So that's September 14th and October 12th. The usual sort of logistics apply. I've already done the outreach and the coordination with city and county, et cetera. So if folks can just kind of help spread the word, and if anybody's inclined to possibly help out, just email me directly. I will announce it at our next meeting, but that's just days before the event. So wanted to get a plug in here. Thanks.
Thanks, Joshua. And there's actually in process on September 14th, a Porch Fest coming to Sebastopol. So maybe we can get them to shill the compost event. That's a good combo, right? All right. Anything else? Any agenda items for next month other than obviously we're bringing back the committee recommendations. We'll take more full working group reports, especially as part of our work plan review. And yes.
Yeah, I'd like to us to discuss the greenhouse gas inventory that the county brought out, and especially focus on what Sebastopol is doing right now and where we're going if we continue the way we're doing.
All right. Anything else, Steve?
Oh, I was going to bring up what Zeno just brought up, but there's also that question on Evergreen. I can do a quick report out on Evergreen and the city.
All right. Anything else? Going once, going twice.
I've got one
Yes.
more. The possibility of reducing the committee size to 7. That's just for you to consider that idea. So,
Councilmember Mauer, do you want to flesh that out with a little more detail for in time for us to submit a more like a one pager maybe when we submit the agenda for next time?
no.
Okay, that's fine. All right, anything else? Going once again, going twice again, and meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much.
Recording stopped.